Welcome along to Matchday Live, your game day preview show for every Leeds Rhinos game, and it's a big one in the Challenge Cup, as tonight we take on Wakefield Trinity over at the DIY Kitchen Stadium, an all-Yorkshire clash yet again off the back of that big win against Castleford last week. The Rhinos, though, heading to the DIY Kitchen Stadium, looking to progress to the quarterfinals of the Challenge Cup, a spot that we haven't gone to since the 2020 season when we ended up winning the competition. My name's Dan Hawkhead. I'm joined by BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon, as usual, taking you through all the squad news, all the opposition preview, and a little bit of history as well, just about our history at this point in the cup competition. But Jack, first off, looking back a few weeks now to that big win over Widnes, now taking that into a big game against Wakefield. What are your expectations for tonight's game, and definitely, I would say, a tough opponent and a maybe underrated opponent in Wakefield?
Without a doubt, yeah, tougher opponent than that Widnes game. You'd probably say, certainly on paper, albeit you look back at that Widnes game. It was the Rhinos' first competitive outing of 2026. Widnes gave them a real good go, caused them some problems, but Leeds just doing enough to get over the line. I think that the Leeds team we've seen since then is completely different. They've started to hit the straps a bit, particularly, obviously, the Vegas game, which we touched on a lot last week. That's the outstanding performance, certainly, this season so far. But, got over the line against Castleford. Wasn't as convincing, but still a comfortable win, you'd probably call it. So I think when you look at that sort of form chart, the Rhinos are trending nicely, I think, at this early point in the season. Still areas where they can improve, and I think Brad Arthur would be the first person to admit that. But I think we're starting to see what this Leeds team could be this season. I think there's a lot of aspects of that game that, while not perhaps polished as they should be just yet, or polished to the best extent, they are certainly getting there, and there's a lot to like about this team. You look at that Wakefield side that they'll come up against. Bit of a slow start from them, particularly when you put it against the expectations that have naturally been built on the back of their surprise 2025 campaign, being promoted from the Championship, ending up in the top six and the playoffs as well. No one really called that at the start of the season, but with that season has come a higher expectation, and they're probably not living up to it as of yet. They look better in their win over Hull FC last weekend in Super League. But up until then, I think have been very unconvincing. They're still a team that are finding their feet in 2026, and that for me may just give the Rhinos the edge going into tonight's game. And
how nice would it be, like we've just said, off the back of last year we dropped out of the cup at the cup competition at this stage against St Helens. We've not really got to the proper knockout rounds for quite some years, even taking out that 2020 season. Actually, how nice would it be to get in that final eight, be another step closer to Wembley, potentially have a big outing like that? We touched on last time how great it is to make those trips down as fans and as sort of media professionals, but how nice would it be to be in that hat for the last eight and really pushing on for a potential final.
Only 3 games from Wembley. Only 3 games. That's all it takes. 3 wins and you're at Wembley.
Seems so close.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like you said, the last time that the Rhinos were there was that COVID season where it was such a fantastic game and a real unique occasion, naturally, with no fans there. But I think that almost, again, took away from what rugby league and sport in general is about, which is having those big atmospheres and those fans there. And I think that's probably what people will be holding on to when it comes to the cup, is that fans were robbed in a sense of getting that big day out at Wembley, seeing the Rhinos lift that trophy again. Will that be the case again this time around in 2026? A side that is really well built, I think really well rounded, as we've discussed already and seen in these early rounds of Super League. There's certainly potential there for a good cup run. It all depends on the teams you come up against, of course, and how they're trending at the time. But I think currently, Leeds are in a really nice position now to be able to make it through to those quarterfinals. So let's
go straight on and look at our opponents today, which is Wakefield Trinity. And like you said, a bit of an inconsistent starter when you look at their form in the league. So they've gone loss against Toulouse, they've gone win against Huddersfield, loss to Warrington, win against Hull. They started their campaign with a big win against Swinton. Do you think that, not that that's offset how they wanted to start the year, but do you think having that sort of big win maybe offset the tone maybe for how they've should have really responded in the league, I guess.
I think so, yeah. I don't think there's an exact science to what the perfect sort of opening Challenge Cup game would be for these Super League sides. As we mentioned earlier, it's those first set of Challenge Cup games for the Super League teams were their first competitive hit-outs of the year. Now, they'd had friendlies and what have you. There's only so much you can take from friendlies, really, but when it's a competitive game, I think a Rhinos team who faced a really competitive Widnes side will have got so much more out of that game, just simply from a competitive aspect. You put the competition or what they were playing for aside, from a competitive aspect, I think Leeds got so much more out of that than, as you say, a Wakefield beating a Swinton, a Hull KR beating an amateur team. I think in Lock Lane at home, that was so one-sided. But really, did KR ever get out of second gear? And I'm not saying it led to that performance in Vegas. I think there's so many more aspects to that, but I think not having that actual test in that first competitive game, I think you're right when you say, in terms of what it offsets afterwards. I think Leeds benefit from having that first game being as competitive as it was, and I think that stood them in really good stead going into the league game, which was a disappointment. But then obviously KR the week after, York the week after, and then the KR game as well, and then Castleford last week. After having that first hit out against Widnes, it almost, I guess, wakes you up a little bit and allows you to shake off that ring rustiness that you've developed over the off-season, whereas those teams that had a perceived easier hit out and racked up those big score lines probably didn't feel the effects as much. So I think there's definitely an argument for that, without a shadow of a doubt, and I think Leeds did benefit from that Widnes win, but also how close and competitive it was when they've then moved on into these other league games. So no, I think without a doubt it's a fair point to make.
And obviously, Darryl Powell is no stranger to the cup either, and he'll be wanting his side to sort of maybe use this competition as a platform to go, right, let's start building some form. You look at what he did with, I think, that 2014 cast side was individual in itself, but more 21, I would say that's more comparable with where Wakefield currently are, in that Cass had started the season okay. They were 6th at the time. Wakefield, to be fair for them, 3 wins on the board. They're 6th as well. They're just in the top 6 of Super League. Actually, he then went and used that as to take them all the way through to Wembley. Yes, they lost to St Helens, but Cass got an outing at Wembley. I think the Cass fans would take that. Would Wakefield at this stage of the competition, having covered them a few times for Radio Leeds this year, would they be another team who would benefit from a cuppa, in your opinion, too?
I think so, yeah. And I think when you look at the Super League table, I think those teams that are expecting to almost be mid-table, and I think Wakefield are a really good example on the back of what they did last year. I think most people would have them in that middle section. I think the sort of top 4 or 5, you can make early guesses, probably end up with egg on your face a little bit, depending on who you pick. But I think you definitely consider Wakefield as one of those middle teams, and I think those particular sides, I think the cup is so beneficial for them, because Wakefield being the example that we use, pushed for the playoffs last year, got in, will have similar expectations or hopes for this season. But also alongside that, if they can get a good cup run going, and focus a lot of energy on that, when it comes to the playoffs and that back end of the Super League season, they may not have a great deal to play for. If they do sneak into the playoffs, they'll give it their all, but they'll be the outsiders naturally and won't have high expectations compared to the teams they're coming up against. But in the Cup, when you're taking those games as individuals, if you can rise to the occasion, I mean, if you look at the football, for example, with the FA Cup, look at what Port Vale did.
Exactly.
Now they've been dreadful in the league, but in the FA Cup have beaten Sunderland and are playing Chelsea. And to throw it back to rugby league, it's not exactly the same comparison, because Wakefield are a top flight side. But when you're pitting them against some of those other sides, when they are taking those games just one by one, and it is individual, like I say, 3 games away from Wembley, if they can rise to the occasion for each of those 3 games, to a good extent, then absolutely they've got all the chance to kick on. Whether or not you sort of measure that alongside their Super League form, it's like I said, there's no exact science, and it's really, really hard to properly predict. But there's no reason why, and we've seen it in the past, teams raise their game for those individual matches, when they're in the Cup, despite what they may be doing in the league.
They're going to be buoyed as well by that 1-point win that they obviously had last time out in the Super League, which saw Mason Lino kick that winning drop goal against the Rhinos. They'll be buoyed by that. looking at the personnel and the individuals that Darryl Powell will have available, you picked out a few. Let's start with Isaiah Vangenaar. What have your impressions been of him this year and his sort of development in his second, I would say, full senior year at Trinity?
Yeah, fantastic player. Came to Super League, or came to England, I should say, a couple of years ago. Was part of their Championship side, Wakefield. Came over carrying a name, of course. The Vangenaar name is of legend in Super League after his dad Joe was such a pivotal figure for Bradford for so many years in the sort of early 2000s. What a player he was! Absolute, giant of a prop forward. So physical, such a worker. And Isaiah, while having a bit of a different sort of style and body type, has got a lot of those similar traits. He's just a worker. He's so physical in the contact, be it in attack or defence. Really rangy as well. He's got good height to him, good strength as well. He's very much commanded one of those positions on the edge for Wakefield in the past couple of years. He's never got a first team squad number or a starting 13 squad number, I should say. He's always been out of that bracket, but regardless, I don't know what he does in pre-season and what that plays into it, but he's constantly demanding a starting spot. He's played a bit in the middle, he's played a bit on the edge. That's mainly where he operates. But when you look at that sort of group of edge forwards that Wakefield have got, Vangenaar is one, Staunton, Nicotemo, Jay Pitts can drop in there as well. But Vangenaar, I think, has been one real consistent part of that for the past couple of years. And as well, he was a great signing for them, I think, in the Championship too. I'd have to look back and see where they signed him from, but it wasn't an NRL side. He never made.
He played a little bit of the Warriors. I think it was sort of in their development system, but it's still not really a big name, is it?
It absolutely makes sense, but they've made a habit of plucking players out of the state cups and the junior teams of NRL sides in the past couple of years of Wakefield, and really use them to good extent. And I think Vangenaar's a really good example of that.
When you break down some of his stats, I mean, they're quite incredible for such a young man. He's first in the team for tackle breaks. He's got 19 of those. 170 tackle busts. 170 tackles, which is, again, the best in the Wakefield team. But that's third in Super League. He's just, when he said about being a workhorse, at such a young age to be sort of putting that on your own name, it's priceless for him, isn't it? Because other teams are going to look at his work rate and go, right, we need to stay away from him, which pushes you over to another side of the field where they potentially got Tom Johnston coming back this week. It adds a lot into, and Darryl Powell likes his pack, doesn't it? And he likes a hard-working pack, so he just adds into that, doesn't he?
Absolutely does. And I think he's probably one of those players, actually, that isn't mentioned too much. Bizarrely, when the players that are taking the headlines are your Tom Johnsons when he's fit, your Max Jowitts, Lino, Truman in the halves, the players at 9, Tyson Smoothy, Harvey Smith, Jazz Tavanga's their big signing this year. Those are the players that have tended to really sort of dominate the headlines, but they wouldn't be able to do what they do without your Isaiah Vangenaars. And he is such a threat on the edge as a runner. But as you've mentioned there, some of his tackling stats are absolutely outstanding. He is such a worker in defence, and the amount of tackles he completes as well. His completion rate in defence is really strong too. So yeah, he's such an asset to them. And you're absolutely right to mention his age too. He's got so much growing room, which is probably the scary thing about a player like that. He's still early to mid 20s. I think I'd have to look at his sort of profile for a proper read on his age. I can't remember what it is, but he's at a good age and he still gets prime ahead of him. And I think working under someone like Darryl Powell will be so beneficial for his career. And depending on how long he stays at Wakefield or in Super League, he could absolutely become one of the competition's premier forwards.
And we'll come on to a few other younger names a little bit later on, but just someone who feels quite young in terms of his age, but has been around for quite a while. You've also touched on, so we'll do it as a bit of a duo, but Corey Hall and Ollie Pratt, so to step outside Vangenaar. Corey Hall in particular this year, outstanding starts of the year for carries, for metres, for tackle breaks. He's one of the leading players for both Trinity and for his carries, especially in Super League. Just what's his impact been in what I think he hopes to have a full season? I think he had a little bit of an injury period at the back end of last year. What are your takes on both him and Pratt as a little combination on the edge?
Really, really good. I remember Corey Hall coming through here at Leeds, signed from Wigan as an academy player. Probably got brought in a bit bit earlier than he'd like, or that would have been beneficial for his development, but it was very much needs must at the time a few years back for the Rhinos, bringing in a lot of that young crop, and Corey Hall was very much part of that. I always thought when he was at Leeds he looked ever so slightly lightweight. It definitely looked like there was a player there, but just naturally because of his age and his sort of lack of maturity at that time, he just did look a bit lightweight, and he was an easy sort of target for opposition players, not for the lack of trying. He always stood up in defence and put his body on the line, but he just didn't have the weight and the strength to back that up. Fast forward a few years and you look at him now, such an asset for Wakefield. He's had that bit of development at Hull KR as well, where he was in and out of their side, found a place though at Trinity, and very much will dominate either centre. He's been played a bit on the left at the start of this year, played predominantly on the right last season, and I think has been switched there recently by Daryl Powell again, certainly in that Hull FC game, which I think was a really interesting sort of move. I mean, their three-quarter line Wakefield is really hard to sort of pin down this year, in part just because of the sheer options they've got. You look at their 2 to 5 numbers wise, you've got Ollie Pratt, Cameron Scott, Corey Hall and Tom Johnston. Now, Johnston's not been fit this season. He's been named in their 21 for this game tonight, so may well be back in. But last week, Daryl Powell sort of veered away from what he'd done so far this season, which he'd had Ollie Pratt on the wing with Corey Hall and Cameron Scott in the centres, but he put Pratt back in the centre, brought Will Tate in on one wing, had Jaden Myers on the other side. And I think just going on to Ollie Pratt, I think that's his best position. I think he absolutely is a centre. He's got all the assets and all the skill to be a centre. I think he's somewhat wasted on the wing. He'll still give you a threat there, but I don't think he hits his full potential when he's out there. He's not on the ball enough. He's not running at tired middles enough. Whereas if he's in the centre, he's got that chance to come in and crab back in towards the middle to really start to take players on with his footwork, which again is one of the big assets to his game. So I thought that was a really interesting switch from Daryl Powell. Corey Hall in the right centre, Ollie Pratt on the left with Tate and Myers on the wings. And I think that was very much the formula that he went with last year. Cameron Scott coming off the bench as a bit of a sort of hybrid centre-back rower. And that's what he did against Hull FC as well last weekend. So I think that's very much going to be the formula for Daryl Powell going forward this year. But in their centres there, in Hall and Pratt, they've got threats on both sides of the field. Both got good passing games as well, can put the wingers in for tries, but also both strong, athletic players.
I'd say it's hard to drop Will Tate looking at the way that he starts the year particularly. I know that he's got a low squad number, but actually he's proving he's an absolute stealer at the minute in terms of tries for Wakefield. Just one of the lads who had a particularly good performance against Hull FC, who did 80 minutes, which he's only one of 5 hookers to do. He's in the top 5 hookers for his performance against Hull FC, was Harvey Smith. Now, you look at who they brought in the offseason. We were talking a little bit pre-show in Jazz Tavanga. We thought would do a little bit of hooker, but he seems to be more of a loose forward. You've got Smoothie, who you'd hope to do more games than he currently has done. Harvey Smith has stepped up in that role and could be a pivotal player, not just on Saturday, but for Wakefield season as a whole, I reckon.
I think he's fantastic. He's such a good player. I mean, Smoothie's out at the minute. He through HIA protocol. He got head knock a couple of weeks back, so missed that whole game. We'll miss tonight's game as well. The real question ahead of the whole game particularly was just what Daryl Powell would choose to do there. He's got Tavanga, who has played at 9 for Samoa and also in part in the NRL, but I think it's quite clear they see him as a 13 and as a sole 13 as well. I think he's still an option should you want to just give Smith a bit of a rest, but he had absolutely no hesitation, Daryl Powell, in chucking Harvey Smith in from the off and playing him 80 minutes. Now, Smith he did start to cramp up a bit in that last 10, which
I don't blame
I think
him,
is understandable because, it's you get certain 9s, I think, that will play 80 minutes but will get away with almost just distributing the ball and not running much. That is not Harvey Smith's game. He's such a runner out of dummy half and such a threat, especially when forwards are getting tired, when markers are lazy and slow to get up. If he spots a chance, he absolutely will take it with both hands. And, he's shown that over the past couple of years. He was sort of considered last season a bit of a bit part player to start with, I think, mainly just due to his age. Daryl Powell didn't want to throw a teenager as he was then into a full Super League season, but his performances just demanded that. And you got sort of midway through 2025 and he was absolutely the option off the bench. He started sometimes as well with Liam Hood coming off the bench, so that was straight away. Just after a few weeks, already Daryl Powell's definite choice as his hooker rotation, and that continued through the season. Now this year they've sort of replenished those stocks. They've brought in Smoothie, they've let Hood go, and you'd imagine this season it'll be very similar with Smoothie the main starter, Smith off the bench. But naturally, when injuries occur and you've got to rotate your squad and you've got to make those tougher choices, Smith certainly in that position is Daryl Powell's number one man when Smoothie's not available. And yeah, he called him brave in his post match last week. Daryl Powell, he called him brave, and he's absolutely right, because again he's a smaller player, is Harvey Smith. He's very stocky, but he's a smaller player and he's got massive forwards running towards him. Sam Lasoni being one of them for the whole last week. We know all about him here at the Rhinos.
Absolutely.
But he always stands up, and he just got through so much work again. And he, like I say, you'd understand a player playing 80 minutes if they were just distributing the ball. But with everything that he does, particularly in attack, getting out from dummy half, moving around the field, it was some performance from him last week to go the full 80 and play the way that he did. And yeah, he's another one of those sort of younger crop of players who has still got so much developing to do. I think he's 20 now. And for me, if you're looking down the line, if England are needing a number 9, I think he's absolutely in the window at the minute.
Really?
Give him a couple of years first, but I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be.
Wow, there we go. The big calls on Matchday Live of the future to come. Again, reiterating that, like you've said about the workload, 46 tackles made in one game, the 5th most by a hooker in Super League this year. Remarkable from Harvey Smith, and one to watch. Now, moving quickly on, Brad Arthur obviously was speaking to the press earlier this week, and here are just some of his pre-match thoughts to give you a little bit more of a preview for today's game.
Same emphasis we put on it last year, and whether it, I don't know what's happened previous years, and I'm not really interested. I'm just worried about what we do now, and we're in a good position. We've got a good squad. We understand how we want to play. We understand that it's make or break. There's no second chances with it. I don't need to continue to talk to that about the boys. I'm sure they're quite aware. We just need to go and play our game. We need to believe in what we do and go and give ourselves our best shot at it. It means something to me too. I like it. I really like the format. I like the idea of it. And it's something I want to be part of right to the end. We know it's not easy and it's tough, and there's a bit of a luck along the way and luck of the draw and that, but I like it. It's good. I like the concept. Building. Like they've had probably a bit of disruption around team and blokes in and out, so I think they're getting close to getting their full team back on the park. But yeah, building, I went and watched them last week, and one thing I do know is they'll be up for the challenge, and they always are. Like I've come to learn very quickly of the rivalry between the two teams, and they played their best footy against us last year, so we're not expecting anything less.
So just a few of Brad Arthur's thoughts there about taking on Wakefield Trinity. In only a few hours' time, the clock's ticking. Team news is coming next, Jack. And just focusing on the 21, so the players who are available for this one, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Tom Johnston back is the big one for Wakefield. Mason Lino dropping out of their 21 officially, but I know he's not played for a few weeks. Johnston being back, though, that's massive in terms of their try-scoring threat and what could be added to the threat of Corey Hall, the threat of Ollie Pratt, and their outside backs.
Huge, yeah. They've been waiting for Johnston to be back fit. He had a bit of minor surgery, a bit of a clean out on his knee, I think, in the off-season. So that's why he's missed the opening rounds of Super League. But absolutely, we know how much of a potent threat he is on that left edge. From anywhere on the field as well, be it a last tackle kick near the opposition line, he's good in the air. Be it from deep as well, he's got such blistering pace. He gallops away like no other player in Super League really when he gets some clear sight in front of him. So yeah, he's such a threat on that left edge, and will probably bring as well just a bit of normality, a bit of clarity to that Wakefield 3/4 line. He's your first pick without a doubt. When you look at those players, he's the first pick on that left edge. I mentioned earlier on in the show that they've had to sort of roll the dice a bit with those outside backs in these early rounds. Again, just sort of due to a few injuries. Lachlan Walmsley's picked up a couple of knocks and he's been in and out. Will Tate as well has been rotated. Ollie Pratt has gone from the wing to the centre. So there's not been really any sort of consistency about those Wakefield outside backs. I think Johnston coming back is a big piece naturally to that puzzle and that jigsaw, and will really just sort of restore that normality amongst that back division.
Absolutely, and focusing now on the Leeds team, because you Rhinos fans want to hear about the Leeds team, of course. 9 changes from the game against Widnes, but not really surprising given the difference in opposition here. We're going from a championship side that, yes, did test us, but championship at the end of the day in Widnes to a full-blown Super League outfit. A trio coming back in that the club announced, which was Michalewski, Brodie Croft and James McDonald. McDonald obviously pulled out, was a late exclusion from the game against Cass. Hopefully we see him back, but just with a few of those changes, and Jack Bird's also just in the background as well, just simmering away.
Waiting to see him.
We really are.
But I think the question, sorry to interrupt, but the question with Jack Bird is, where does he go? And I think that's the
tell me.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I really don't know. I think he's one of those players, again, because he's got a utility value, he's probably good off the bench. And he can fill in just about wherever you need. He can fill in the halves, he can fill in the centres, you can pop him in the back row if you need to. He's got that versatility, which is fantastic to have in a player. But who do you drop? And I mean, even just looking at that 21, it's so tough to pick a 17. And you're going to have to leave out some big names there. I mean...
Well, it's 1 to 17 in the first place. So
exactly.
Which of those first 17 do you actually take out when you've got... you've got Danny Levi, you've got George Brown who are outside of that. Who do you drop?
Well, exactly. I mean, there's a couple of players in there that you'd imagine will be late calls when it comes to fitness. Brodie Croft probably being one of them. Whether or not he's fully recovered from that knock that saw him miss out last week. Michalewski still coming back into the fold after that injury against Widnes where he did his ribs. There's a couple of players there that'll probably be given the time and have been given the chance to get themselves back into the squad. But I think Brad Arthur said before, with the squad they've got at the minute and the players that are playing the way that they are and are so in form, if you need to give players that extra week, then he absolutely will do, because he knows that there's players there that can backfill those roles to a really high standard. So yeah, I think that's such a difficult 17 to pick from the 21 that are there. Naturally, you've got some of your obvious choices in your Lockie Millers, your Jake Connors. There's a good chunk of the team that picks itself, but there's a handful of players there that you could probably flip a coin to decide who plays, and they'd still give you a good run out. So yeah, I wouldn't like to be Brad Arthur trying to pick that squad this week. He might have a couple of calls made for him when it comes to those players with just coming back off injuries and fitness. I think it's probably a bit early for Jack Bird. Was 18th man against Castleford last week, so has had that little run out warm up with the team, has had a little taste of what Headingley is like on a match day. But like I say, probably still a bit early for him, but someone that's certainly waiting in the wings, as are a couple of other players who have missed out in the last few weeks.
I couldn't tell you the last time that it was 1 to 17.
Likewise.
That I saw that Leeds team got announced and it was numbers 1 to 17, and you went, right, that's great. But even the options outside, it's a very different squad to a squad that I would say we've ever had, in that you look at those options and you go, well, not even outside Jack Bird with his utility capabilities. You go in, right, there are a number of positions we could bang on about the forward pack, and we have done in previous shows for this. But even your outside backs, your halves, there are too many options now. And that's not a bad thing. That is a good thing. We would rather have that as Rhinos fans. And yeah, it's good to see in the end of the day, isn't it? And let's move on to our head-to-head. I think this is quite a good segue to talk about halves and somewhere that Jack Bird can play. George Brown is one of those guys who's going to be, whether Brodie Croft's fit or not. I think he maybe gave Brad Arthur a little bit of a headache. We've gone with him against Jackson Field as this week's head-to-head. He will have given Brad Arthur some headaches just on his performance against Cass last time out, I think, George Brown.
Yeah, without a doubt. George Brown's really stepped up this season. I think a lot of people have seen that. I think his performance against Castleford was his best so far. Gets a try again. He can't stop scoring. It seems handy, George Brown, when you chuck him in those 2 Boxing Day games, the Widnes game, the Castleford game, he just seems to pop up in good areas, which I think is a sign of a very good half. Like, you look at Danny Maguire, for years and years and years now. I know that's a big comparison. I'm not chucking that at him right now, but Danny Maguire had that immense, amazing try-scoring record, and a lot of that was just being in the right place at the right time and finding a knack for it. Be that, on the shoulder of a player who's just made a break, popping up in the right areas near the line to get on the end of a kick or an offload. There's something to be said about players who can do that. Maguire was fantastic for doing that. George Brown, certainly on these early sort of bits of evidence we've had of him when he's been in that first team environment, seems to have a similar knack, certainly early on in his career, just popping up in those right areas to get on the end of any sort of half chance that may present itself. And of course, he did that against Castleford too. Now, our head-to-head this week, which is him against Jack Sinfield, he's obviously really fascinating given Sinfield's history at the Rhinos. Made that move over the winter, over to Wakefield. Again, on the early sort of evidence of this year's Super League has been really good for it. He's looked really, really steady and really confident, actually, in that Wakefield side. He's been brought in for Mason Lino, who picked up a knock. Mason Lino was one of Wakefield's best last year, by the way, it's worth mentioning.
Yes.
But him and Jake Truman in the halves have just looked really steady and really confident. And I think that's the one thing that you always wanted to see with Jack Sinfield. Everyone involved at the Rhinos, including Rhinos fans, always wanting to see him do well. In part, I think, because of his dad and because of the name he had on his back, and the connection there that was only natural, but also because you could always tell in a game that he was one of those that never slumped, was never lazy. He always, put everything into a game, but just sometimes you felt like he just didn't get enough of a run. For a number of reasons, there were players there that were more of a first choice than he was, and that were probably better options than him. But he was always just enough on the periphery that he was part of the squad, but not getting enough minutes that he probably needed to develop as a young halfback. And clubs in and around Super League will have those similar issues with young players. I think Wigan with Jack Farramond is a real example.
That's a really great one.
Now he's going to get a chance in these next few weeks with Bevan French and Jay Field missing out for them, so that's his chance. Jack Sinfield, it felt, never really got that opportunity, where there were players out for a certain amount of time that allowed him to really sort of step up and take the opportunity with both hands. Now, at Wakefield, I think there's part of the argument that naturally there's less pressure. He's at a club where he's not got a dad who is considered a legend there, and as much as he would probably always shrug off that was a thing that weighed on him, I think it was only natural that it did. The expectation was there even when he was coming through as a teenager. That he would live up to what his dad did at the club, and I think that can be really hard probably as a player like that. So I think that expectation, that pressure has gone. It's a completely new slate from a fresh start at Wakefield, and like I said, he looks really confident going forward. There's been a couple of occasions in the last couple of games where he's kicked early. He's put kicks into a corner. It led to a try for Ollie Pratt a couple of weeks ago at Warrington in that defeat. Did something very similar as well against Hull last week, where Wakefield were under the cosh a bit and had started to lose that field position battle, and he kicked early in a set and pinned Hull in the corner. They got a goal line drop out off the back of it, Wakefield. So little plays like that where he just swings the momentum are really starting to become quite prevalent in his game, and I think he has been all the better for that move to Wakefield. And it's good to see as well, because as I said, everyone wanted to see him excel, and I think he's finally found a place where he can do that. Now, that matchup against George Brown again made all the more interesting. And when we talked about this in the week, Dan, I said how many times had they played together?
There's one man who comes to fill his stats, Jack.
Well, this is what I mean. And is it 7 games?
7 games.
Which I thought it'd be more, actually. I thought it'd be more in the past couple of years that they played academy and reserves together. But I guess when you look at, like I say, Jack Sinfield being right on the periphery of the squad, there were probably occasions where he didn't play reserves because he was travelling with the first team to be 18th or 19th man. Harry Smith as well was coming in alongside George Brown in that academy setup. So there's options there, and always has been for Leeds. Fergie McCormack as well. There's a group there of four reserves / academy halves that they've had for the last couple of years. So Sinfield probably just found himself a bit too much in the first team to feature alongside those guys. But they'll they will be familiar with each other's game, without a doubt, you'd think, having played and trained alongside each other so much, Sinfield and Brown. So, yeah, it's a real interesting dynamic that I think. George Brown, who's sort of come out of nowhere this season, certainly, to play the role that Sinfield had at Leeds last year, which was as backup half, and Brown has certainly impressed in these early rounds, as has Sinfield for Wakefield. So you've got two rookie halfbacks there trying to make their way in the game that have certainly shown up well in 2026 so far. So yeah, it's a real interesting sort of dynamic, I think, that when you look at those two.
And I think it really adds to it that they're two very different halfbacks as well. Like you've touched on, that Jack's kicking game is obviously and I would say more his structure and how he structures games is probably his strength. George is able, like you touched on with Danny Maguire, like he has that ability to, right, this is what I need to do, but actually if there's an option and there's a bit of a gap in front of me, will he take it? Absolutely, when he's got the speed and the footwork he has. When you look at the guys that they'll be partnering up with, so you've got Jake Truman on Wakefield's side, you've got Jake Connor. In this situation, should Croft not play, they'll be partnered with George. Again, they do almost the opposite role. So Jack, they both complement each other's other options quite well, actually, which I guess is no headache for either Darryl Powell or Brad Arthur.
Without a doubt, and I think with Brown, we've heard Brad Arthur say that what really was the difference in that in that Castleford performance was that he looked more confident and his teammates seemed to trust him more. Now, when he played against Lee, I personally thought that was the one area where they fell down a bit, Leeds, in that Brown was, particularly in the first half, I don't want to say spare parts, I think that's unfair, but you look at the way that Croft and Connor play alongside each other, there's so much synergy and trust there, and Miller as well you can chuck into that mix. When Brown was there, it just sort of took away from Brodie Croft's natural game, and he almost, as you'd imagine he would as a more senior player, probably tried to protect George Brown a bit too much when it came to taking on that responsibility in those roles, whereas I think in that Castleford performance, those roles and those jobs and those responsibilities were much more evenly shared, and Brown came into his own a lot more, hence why he was a lot more impressive. So I think that is certainly an area when you look at those combinations where it's a really, really intriguing prospect against Wakefield, because Brown and Connor now, it's another different halves combination that we've not seen this season. So how will those two fare there? But, if Jake Connor gives as much responsibility to George Brown as Brodie Croft did last week, then I think Leeds again are on to a winner this week. I really, really do, because Brown has all the attributes to be a top half in this side, and particularly when he's playing backup, he's a great option to have. And if Connor's given him that same amount of trust, then I don't think Leeds have got anything to be worried about, the fact that Brodie Croft may not be available tonight. So on the flip side, like you say, Jack Sinfield filling the shoes of Mason Lino, who, I think that's changed the dynamic of Wakefield's halves. I think of the Truman and Lino combination. Truman's probably more your organiser. Lino's the one that plays what he sees a bit more. Whereas that's not Sinfield's game, as you mentioned. His kicking game, his structured play, his organisation is probably his real strong point as a halfback. But at the same time, him and Truman have seemingly struck up a really good combination. So who knows? When you see those players just dropped into those situations, it can be sink or swim at times. And I think both Sinfield and Brown are absolutely swimming at the minute.
And two star halfbacks, two young prospects that could really decide tonight's game. Now, if you're not headed to the DIY Kitchen Stadium, you can get some last minute tickets, but if you're unable to get yourself down to Wakefield, there are a few ways that you can make sure you're staying in touch with tonight's game. The first is you can watch the game live. It's on the BBC Red button, an iPlayer, so that's easy enough to go through for your smart TVs and whatnot. If you wanted to have a listen, as usual, we're pushing our great friends at BBC Radio Leeds. James Dayton will be at the DIY Kitchen Stadium for this one, and I believe you're doing also updates from tonight's other game, Wigan Bradford 2.
Yep.
So obviously listen to these guys for your radio coverage. If you wanted to follow all the scores, all the post-match updates, everything post-game, the best thing is to keep it at Leeds Rhinos across Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed. My thank yous to Jack. As always, my name's been Dan Hawkhead. This has been Matchday Live. Team News is coming next.